The stadium holds 80,000 people, and every single one of them is holding their breath. There is a specific kind of silence that descends just before something extraordinary happens. It isn't quiet. The crowd is deafening. But beneath the roar, beneath the pulse of anticipation, there is a stillness. A gathering. Like the world pulling one long breath inward before it exhales everything at once. Off stage, a young woman stands in the dark. She doesn't fidget. She doesn't pace. She simply exists in that final moment before the world rushes back in. Her eyes forward, her expression carved from something stronger than confidence. Something harder won. The lights explode, and she moves. And in that single electric instant, a girl from a province most people have never heard of becomes the entire world. But here's what no one thinks to ask. How? How does a child with nothing, no money, no industry connections, no map for the road ahead, end up here? The answer begins not on a stage. It begins in the red soil of northeastern Thailand, Buriram. If you've never heard of it, you're in excellent company. It sits in the northeastern corner of Thailand, a province more famous for its ancient Khmer temples and its Formula One racing circuit than for producing global icons. Its streets are wide and unhurried. Its people are warm. Its rhythms are shaped by seasons, by harvest, by the kind of time that doesn't answer to ambition. It is not Bangkok. It is not a city where the word celebrity floats naturally through the air. It's the kind of place where generations take root and stay. Not because they lack imagination, but because nobody ever handed them a reason to leave. Into this quiet world in the mid-1990s, a girl was born. Her given name was Pranpriya, a Thai name, a soft name, a name that carried no prophecy, no prediction, no hint of what was coming. Her early years carried their own weight. Her parents separated when she was young, a fracture that reshaped her childhood in ways she would spend years learning to articulate. The world tilted, but she found her footing. She found it in movement. She was 4 years old, some say younger, and already when music played, her body answered in a way that made adults stop and stare. Not because she'd been taught to. She hadn't. Not because someone told her to perform, but because her body seemed to already understand something the rest of us spend our whole lives reaching for. The precise conversation between rhythm and feeling. Her mother watched. Her stepfather, a European chef who had made Thailand his home and his heart, watched. And what they saw wasn't just talent. What they saw was a vocation. Something not chosen, but arrived at. Something inevitable. She trained. Relentlessly. Hip-hop, traditional Thai classical forms, contemporary movement. She absorbed every style the way a sponge absorbs water. As the years passed, she grew from a child who danced because it felt like breathing into a teenager who competed with the focused hunger of someone who understood, at a cellular level, that this was her path. By her early teens, she was traveling to Bangkok, the capital, the city of smoke and neon and possibility, to compete. And she won. She kept winning. And people in rooms with clipboards and watchful eyes began to take notice. But none of them, not her coaches, not her competitors, not the girl herself, could have imagined what one competition in Bangkok was about to set into motion. Chapter 1. The Audition. The year was 2010. She was 13 years old. YG Entertainment, one of South Korea's most powerful and most selective music labels, had sent representatives to Bangkok for an open audition. They weren't just looking for singers. They weren't just looking for pretty faces. They were looking for that impossible-to-define quality that the industry calls it, and that the rest of us simply recognize when we see it. Thousands showed up. From across Thailand. From across Southeast Asia. The odds were not just difficult. They were designed to break the heart of anyone who wasn't absolutely certain. She was certain. When it was her turn, she stepped into that space, and she danced. That's really all there is to say about what happened next, because some moments resist description. She danced, and the room shifted. The energy reorganized itself around her. The judges leaned forward. Of the thousands who auditioned that day, one person from Thailand was selected. One. Her. But passing was not the victory. Passing was the invitation. The invitation to leave every familiar thing behind, board a plane to a country she had never lived in, and begin again from zero. She was 13. A child. Heading to Seoul, a city of 10 million people, a language she did not speak, an industry with standards so exacting they made ordinary excellence look like a rough draft. Chapter 2. The Trainee Years. The Korean language did not come easily. Nothing about it came easily. She had to learn to speak it, to sing in it. Not approximately, but perfectly. Every syllable had to land exactly right, because in the K-pop training system, close enough is the same as failure.
She cried.
Of course she did. She was a teenager, alone in a foreign city, surrounded by trainees who had years of head start, embedded in a culture that was not hers, singing music in a language that still felt like a stranger in her mouth. But she kept going. Every single day. She kept going. The YG training system is not sentimental. Trainees can be cut at any moment, after 6 months, after 3 years, with nothing to show for it. There is no guarantee. There is no promise. You pour your youth into the machine, and you trust that the machine is building something worthy. You trust yourself when the machine gives you nothing back but feedback and a harder standard. She trained for 5 years. 5 years. 5 years of learning to be fluent in Korean pop music while never forgetting that she was Thai. 5 years of mastering choreography so complex it required the precision of an athlete and the expressiveness of an actor, simultaneously, in real time, in front of cameras. 5 years of sacrifice that happened largely in silence, in practice rooms that the public would never see. And then, in the summer of 2016, YG Entertainment made an announcement. A new girl group. 4 members. Their debut was imminent. And among them, quietly historic, even if no one quite understood it yet, was the only non-Korean ever to debut in a YG girl group. A dancer from Buriram, Thailand. A young woman who had been renamed in the way of K-pop tradition for her stage career. They called her Lisa. Chapter 3. Debut. August 8th, 2016. 2 songs, Whistle and Boombaya. And within hours of release, not days, hours, those songs were shattering records on Korean music charts. The industry took notice immediately. The public took notice even faster. And then, international fans found her. In America, in the UK, in France and Brazil and Australia. They watched the choreography, and they froze. Because there, at the front, was a dancer who moved differently. Who commanded the camera with a kind of effortless authority that suggested she had been doing this not for a year, but for a lifetime. Millions of people had the same thought, in a dozen different languages. Who is she? They were about to find out. Because Lisa was only beginning, and the question was no longer whether the world would notice her. The question was, what she would do when it finally gave her the stage entirely to herself. There is a particular species of loneliness that success alone cannot touch. It is the loneliness of being exceptional in a place where you still feel, in some residual corner of yourself, like you don't fully belong. By the time BLACKPINK completed their first world tour, selling out arenas on multiple continents, performing to audiences who had never previously cared about K-pop, Lisa had amassed a following that defied easy comprehension. On Instagram, she had become the most followed K-pop artist in history. The numbers were not just impressive, they were unprecedented. And yet, there was an unfinished sentence. A chapter that BLACKPINK, as beloved and as powerful as they were, could not write for her alone. Because there is a difference between being celebrated as part of something extraordinary and standing alone in the center of a light that belongs entirely to you. In September 2021, she wrote that chapter herself. Her debut solo single was named Lalisa, her real name. The name she was given when she arrived in Korea, a simplified version of Pranpriya, a bridge between the girl she had been and the artist she was becoming. And what happened next was not a gradual build. It was not a careful climb. It was an eruption. Within 24 hours of release, the music video had been viewed more than 70 million times. 70 million. She became the first non-Korean solo artist to reach the top of Billboard's Hot Trending Songs chart. The first, in the entire history of that chart. A woman from Thailand singing in Korean had just rewritten the rulebook of the global music industry. Let that settle for a moment. Really, let it settle. In Thailand, people gathered around every available screen, and they watched. And many of them wept. Not simply because a Thai woman had become internationally famous, though that alone was extraordinary enough. They wept because they understood the distance. They understood the years. They understood that behind every second of that performance was a decade of sacrifice so private, so unwitnessed, that the only person who could ever fully measure it was the one who had paid it. The performance itself was a declaration. It drew from the visual culture of Thailand, references to classical Thai art, to Southeast Asian aesthetic traditions, woven into contemporary production in a way that was neither apology nor imitation. It was synthesis. It was a woman saying, without words, I come from here. And I am also this. And there is no contradiction between the two. There are moments in a person's life that don't merely change them, they confirm them. The Lalisa era was that. It confirmed, for anyone who still needed confirming, that the center of gravity in global culture was no longer fixed to any single geography. That greatness doesn't carry a passport. That a girl from a small town in northeastern Thailand could illuminate a stage whose light reached every corner of the earth. And she had earned every single lumen of it. The music industry was only the beginning. Because once the world processed what Lisa represented, not just as a performer but as a complete cultural force, the response came from directions that had nothing to do with charts or streaming numbers. It came from institutions with centuries-old names and notoriously guarded doors. Celine, the storied French fashion house, appointed her as a global brand ambassador. This was not a routine endorsement. Celine is one of the most selective brands in the world. Their aesthetic is surgical. Their ambassadors are chosen not for follower counts alone, but for whether they embody a particular moment in cultural time. They chose Lisa. Others followed. MAC Cosmetics. Further global partnerships with brands that had, until recently, sourced their faces almost exclusively from a narrow set of markets. Each new announcement sent its own signal, quiet but impossible to miss, to an industry that had long operated on an implicit assumption about what international beauty looked like. That assumption was being dismantled. Methodically. Beautifully. In 2023, BLACKPINK took the Coachella main stage. For the 400,000 people who attended across the 2 weekends, and the millions more who watched via livestream, it was the defining performance of the festival. Not just technically, not just choreographically, but in terms of what it meant for a genre, and for the women who had carried it to that moment. American publications called her a generational talent. British outlets ran long-form profiles asking how they'd taken so long to pay attention. French fashion journalists wrote about her influence not just on music, but on the aesthetics of a generation. In Australia, she trended nationally with each new announcement, each new collaboration, each new chapter of a story that refused to stop expanding. The world had not merely noticed Lisa. The world had adopted her. And in Thailand, in Bangkok, in Chiang Mai, in the red soil towns of the Northeast, something was shifting in a way that statistics cannot fully capture. A generation of young women began to dream with a specificity they hadn't had before. Because she had given them coordinates. Because she was proof that the geography of your birth does not determine the geography of your future. Dance academies across Thailand reported surges in enrollment. Girls who had never imagined a stage beyond their hometown began asking, quietly at first, then with growing insistence, whether they too might try. The ripple effect of one person's courage is immeasurable, but it is real. It is permanent. It moves through communities like water finding its level, and it does not stop. Her music accumulated hundreds of millions of streams. Her social media presence crossed 100 million followers, placing her among the most followed human beings on Earth, full stop. She was not simply famous. She was a case study, a proof of concept, an argument made in real time for what happens when genuine talent meets genuine, will meets genuine sacrifice, and refuses to negotiate. And those who had watched her from the beginning, collaborators, fellow artists, the coaches who had seen her in practice rooms at 2 a.m, said, almost uniformly, the same thing. She hadn't changed. The hunger was identical. The work ethic was undimmed. The girl who had danced in Buriram was still, somehow, present in the woman performing in Paris. That is rarer than the talent. That is the thing that no spotlight can manufacture and no record label can engineer. That is hers. There is a conversation happening right now, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in the comment sections of platforms that didn't exist 15 years ago. It is a conversation about who gets to be iconic, who gets to be worthy of the world's sustained, serious attention, whose face gets to represent beauty at a global scale, and whose story gets to be told as though it matters. For a very long time, that conversation had a very narrow set of answers. Lisa did not set out to be a symbol. She set out to dance, to perform, to honor the years she had surrendered to practice rooms and recording sessions, to make the loneliness mean something retroactively, to justify the sacrifice by becoming worthy of it. But symbol, she became. Not because anyone assigned her the role, but because representation moves through the world whether or not you intend it. When a girl in a rural province of Thailand sees someone who looks like her, who carries the same soil in her history, who has spoken the same language of heat and paddy fields and temple bells, standing at the peak of a global industry, something shifts that cannot be unshifted. She has spoken, in her own way, about what Thailand means to her. Not as a place left behind, but as a place she carries. Every performance is, in some sense, a letter home. Every record broken is a gift dispatched across the distance, back to the country that shaped her before the world claimed her. Women's empowerment. The phrase itself can feel worn smooth by overuse. But watch what it looks like when it's lived, rather than stated. Watch someone navigate an industry that did not have a template for her, that had to construct one in real time as she moved through it. She made choices, with intention. She chose partnerships that respected her agency. She built a creative identity so coherent that it became, itself, a kind of architecture. Something others could stand under and feel sheltered by. Nobody handed her a seat at the table. She built the table. The scholars who study the K-pop industry have noted something structurally significant in what Lisa's career has demonstrated, the way her success decentralized the genre from its own origins. K-pop began, by definition, as Korean popular music. But Lisa's international appeal, the way she drew fans in countries with no prior relationship to the genre, the way she topped charts in markets that were not the intended target, proved something fundamental. That the audience didn't require the music to be Korean. They required it to be extraordinary. And when extraordinary arrived from Thailand, the industry had no meaningful objection to offer. She changed the conversation. She expanded the frame. And the artists who come after her, the girls in Buriram who are, right now, practicing in front of mirrors with her music playing, will walk a road she cut from ground that was not yet passable. That is what legacy actually looks like. Not a monument. Not a trophy. A road. Here's what I believe. Every generation produces a small number of people whose lives tell the rest of us something true about what is possible. Not through speeches or manifestos, not through theory, but through the simple, devastating act of becoming, of insisting, against every reasonable argument for stillness, on movement. Lalisa Manobal, born Prenpriya, raised in Buriram, renamed Lisa in Seoul, known everywhere, is one of those people. Her story is not a fairy tale. Fairy tales are convenient fictions. This is something harder and more valuable, the result of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, of sacrifice made quietly and consistently over years, of a belief in herself so steady that it survived separation from home, the exhaustion of reinvention, the pressure of representing something larger than herself without ever losing sight of what was at the center. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that talent will always find its stage, because it won't. Not without work, not without will. But that the work, done with enough honesty and enough hunger, makes the stage inevitable. Eventually. So the next time you watch her perform, next time you encounter those record-breaking view counts, those 100 million followers, those Coachella stages and Parisian runways, remember the red soil of Buriram. Remember the 4-year-old who danced because she had no language for the feeling except movement. Remember the 13-year-old who stepped into a room full of thousands and chose to be extraordinary instead of safe. Because that is where all of it began. And because greatness, real, earned, unassailable greatness, always begins somewhere ordinary. Always.